It's bedtime, way past my bedtime.
Yeah. I will be in bed at 10 o'clock tonight.
No, but Laura asked me to do a bit of preaching on the accessioning, which I always love, so.
Yeah. Hi, John. Hi, Rob. Well,
Hi, Laura. Hi, John.
Hi, Rob.
Folks I don't know yet. My name's Rob. I work with fish at the Florida Museum, same as Laura.
Okay.
Hello, Sarah, who I don't know, and Amsterdam, you're going to have to pronounce your name
Yeah,
for me.
I was just going to change it into Didi because Dieuwertje is too difficult.
Say it again.
Dieuwertje.
Dieuwertje. I like that.
It means protector of the people.
Oh.
oh.
Wow.
You should always know what your name means. Mine means beloved of God. So
Ooh.
yeah, God regrets that now.
They're higher callings. Those are both tough to live up to, but wish you guys the best.
Well, thank you. I wish my parents knew before they called me this. So.
Parents should always look at the meaning of that name.
Yeah, you think so, right?
No.
It's quite an unusual name, so they should have thought about it.
I named my daughter Sophia because I knew she would be smart. So.
Choice.
And sorry, John, you were from?
Oh, I'm sorry. I live in Pennsylvania in the United States. I used to be at University of Kansas for many, many years. And I now work as a museum consultant.
Nice.
Oh, it's fun. I do whatever I want.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Except currently that means nothing.
Well. Yeah, that's difficult, right?
Yeah. I have plenty to do, so I'm not terribly worried.
Oh, that's a good thing. There's someone new. Marie Angel? Mary Angel.
Marie. Hello.
Hi.
Email from the listserv, so I thought I'd hop on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We were just sort of introducing ourselves. Some of us know each other, but others were just kind of getting to know each other.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm a curatorial assistant in geology at the California Academy of Sciences.
Cool.
Yeah.
My former place of work.
Oh, awesome.
I was there from 76 to 81.
Oh, it's a little bit before my time.
Yeah, back when those
that.
rocks were young.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I started out as a zookeeper and decided I liked dead animals better. So I left the zoo and went to California Academy of Sciences.
Awesome.
Marie, are your exhibits open now? Is the public back in with social distancing or no, none of that?
Not
Yes,
yet,
we
no.
are.
You guys are?
You asked me, right?
I'd ask Marie, but
Marie, I thought you said Didi. Sorry.
that's fine.
No
Yeah.
worries.
Go ahead, Marie.
No, we're still closed to the public. Some staff are going in on a very occasional basis. Of course, our biologists and engineers are there keeping the building and running and the animals fed, but the public floor is still closed.
That's a significant loss of revenue.
Absolutely, yeah.
Didi, you said you are open?
We're open again, yes. And we have COVID measures that were only 50 people allowed, but now they changed museums in other places that you walk through. I don't know how to say that better. So libraries, museums, other places there are allowed more people as long as you can keep your 1.5 meter distance. But I think that we have a slightly lesser problem regarding revenues because we have most of all our museums are subsidized.
That's an interesting concept that we seem not able to wrap our minds around here in the United States.
It's changing here, I'm afraid, but.
Our exhibit hall is open again, and my understanding from the people who work there, I work in the collections and research facility, separate buildings. is that they are trying to do social distancing, but they aren't always succeeding to the degree that the staff would find comfortable. So they recently had an event for a new exhibit, and I think they had 900 people at the event.
Oh, wow.
And the galleries, not necessarily all at the same time, but that day they had visitation of 900 people. And to put that in perspective, we typically get about 200,000 people a year. So nearly 1,000 people in a single day is a very big day. So.
And it's worked out.
Don't know, that was within the last week. So, and it's very hard to do reliable contact tracing, or not hard to do. Obviously it's easy to do if you put the resources together, but it's being done inconsistently from community to community in the United States. We have no federal leadership. I mean, I think I can make that an objective statement here. We have no leadership from the top down. There's no esprit de corps. There's no, hey, we're all in this together like World War II. There's just, hey, you all figure it out for yourselves.
Right.
That's where we're at. Sorry. Laura, this is your meeting. We'll let you tell us why we're all here.
Okay, I think that is time to start formally our meetup, and thank you so much for being here. As I said in my first meetup, I decided to create this club because I want to get a better understanding of my field. So this is my second year in my museum studies program here at UF. And I'm new in the country, I'm new in the language, I'm new with everything. And this is a big challenge for me as well, but it's something that I want to do because I really love collections and I'm very interested. So I was looking for a different space from the academic, and I would like to have this space where students, where volunteers, where emerging professionals can discuss about some powerful literature, because I have realized that we have like the article that we are going discussing today that is very nice and very interesting, but when you go to the real work life, some things are very different. And it's and also I want to have this space to ask, to speak out our opinions or thoughts or feelings. And yeah, so welcome. If you all want, we can do like a check-in, and I have like an icebreaker activity. So the idea is that you can introduce yourself, and the question is, if you were an object or a specimen, what would you like to be? So if someone wants to start and nominate the next person.
I think John's a good person to start.
Oh, thanks, Rob. Yeah, it's really nice. Well, since I'm the only one here that's actually old enough to be a museum specimen, let me see. Okay, so my name's John, and I run a museum consulting service. I've been in the business for 50 years. And so I used to be a zookeeper in Texas, and then I was at California Academy of Sciences as collection manager, and then at University of Kansas as a collection manager. And I also ran the museum studies program there for 6 years. And I've been here in Pennsylvania since 2008. And with the consulting, and I do a fair amount of teaching and other work. And actually how I met Laura is, met her in Colombia, in Bogota, at the university. So let's see, if I was going to be a specimen, I guess I would have to say I would like to be a holotype of a really interesting frog, because that's what I worked on back when I was a collections manager, spent most of my life working with tropical frogs, and I'll go with that.
The idea is to nominate someone else. John, could you?
Okay, well then I'm going to stick it back on Rob.
Oh, man. All right. Well, at least we're going to get the old guys out of the way first. So I'll keep it brief. I have a little less history, but I've been at the Florida Museum of Natural History as the ichthyology collection manager since 1996, and we're a large collection of specimens. Not a lot of people realize that we're second only to Michigan, I think, as a university-based museum in the United States. Our fish collection is about 8,000 species, and we work hard to curate the data there to get a clean number of species count. It's a great place to work. Really enjoy being on a university campus. If I were to be a specimen, I've already decided that people can do with my body what they want after I'm gone. So I'm just going to be a human cadaver specimen one day, I hope. But it doesn't really matter what I want because I'll be gone. And I'm going to go random. I don't know Sarah well, but I'm going to pick Sarah. Nominate Sarah to go next.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I am the collections manager for the herbarium at the University of Connecticut. And I've been a botanist for about 20 years. I went to undergraduate here in Connecticut because that's where I grew up. And then I got my PhD at the University of Texas. And I've traveled around. I've been really lucky to live in a whole lot of different places. So I've explored the botany of Texas and Mexico and Colorado and the Canadian Rockies, in South Carolina, the Blackwater swamps in South Carolina. So it's been really, really cool, but I like being back home in New England. And I love working in a herbarium. For me, it's the perfect balance of being in a really intellectually stimulating academic environment, but also I get to spend a ton of time just by myself with my specimens. So I really love it a lot. And our university is doing okay with COVID right now. And so I am on site 2 days a week. Our herbarium is part of an integrated collection. So the herbarium is in the same facility as our vertebrates and invertebrates and paleobotany collections. So I have other collections managers, colleagues, and it's really fun to be with people who specialize in other taxa. And right now we split up the week. So I go in 2 days a week and the other collections managers are in other days. And I think if I was going to be an object or a specimen, I probably would pick some kind of a hawthorn because those are my favorite herbarium specimens. I just love those super, super long spines. And I think they're really cool. So that's probably what I would be. Okay, because I don't know who's here from the Matheson Museum. That's who I'll call on.
You all hear me? I'm having a lot of technical difficulties right now. I'm trying to zoom in from my phone and my computer is throwing a tantrum.
That's okay. Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Okay, great. So this is Caitlin Hoff-Mahoney. I'm the curator of collections at the Matheson Museum. I'm trying to get video going. My computer has been restarting for about 10 minutes. So we are a history museum in Gainesville, Florida, and we have been closed since March. That's been weird not having people come in, but it has also been nice because we've had lots of time to work on some of the collections projects that we don't normally have time for. So if I were an object, I would say, well, the first thing that came to mind currently is, something, maybe one of our newspapers that's fragile and under a lot of stress. I think I may have fixed it.
Hey, there you are.
Yeah.
Here I am. Okay, great. So now that I have got that fixed, I think maybe I would be a postcard. Those are some of my favorite things that we have in our collection. We have postcards from Alachua County, and we also have historic postcards from the rest of the state of Florida. And those are some of my favorite things that we have. doesn't matter what I'm looking for. There always seems to be a postcard that's applicable. So, yeah, I'm going to pick Marie to go next.
So like I said earlier, my name is Marie, and I'm a curatorial assistant in geology at the California Academy of Sciences. I've been there about 2.5 years. I actually don't have any sort of geology or paleontology background. My master's is in museum studies, and I have a certificate in collections management and care. So I learn a lot about geology and minerals and paleo on the job, which is always really fun. It's always something new to learn, of course. And since we've been working from home the past 6-7 months, mainly been doing data entry and working on digitizing our collections. We have 2 big grants and NSF grants in our department right now. One is digitizing our Eastern Pacific Cenozoic invertebrates, and another one is focusing on our forum collection and digitizing that collection. So we've been trying to do as much as we can from home. Now our collections manager is going in 2 days a week starting in October, and our other curatorial assistant in our department is going in 1 day a week. So just to kind of keep things going within our department. And if I had to be a specimen, I think I would pick some kind of trilobite, just because they're so weird looking, but also because they survive for millions of years and they're pretty hardy animals. And I think I'll go to D. You're the only person who hasn't gone yet.
Or Laura. I like going. Well, I'm Dieuwertje, Didi, from Amsterdam. I specialized in deaccessioning over 10 years ago, already thinking that it would never be any issue in the whole museum management. And then 5 years ago, 6-7 years ago, it started booming. I'm a independent museum consultant myself. Have been working all through COVID. It's been very busy. A lot of museums are assessing their collections. And next to collection strategies, as I call it, I do work on participation, heritage participation. So I'm changing my spectrum a bit to more the people-oriented spectrum of museum work, although I still love being on my own in a storage space with only objects like a golem, walking around, noticing things, discovering things. And if I were to be a museum object, I think I would really love to be a paintbrush by Vincent van Gogh. I think that paintbrush could tell really interesting stories. And I think that stories are the main subject of museums, and objects help tell the stories. Laura.
I'm Laura. I'm from Colombia, and I'm doing my master in museum studies here at UF. And I would like to be maybe a clear and stain specimen, because it's the collection that I'm interested now, and that's the only thing that I know because I'm learning this semester about collections management, and I will be working with the ichthyology collection, and those specimens are really beautiful. So I don't know if maybe Gigi or Caitlin know about the clear and stain specimen, but is this like fish that are preserved in glycerin? And for example, these specimens has 2 colors. Like the red one stands for the bones, like highlight all the bones in red. And the blue stands for cartilage. Okay, cartilage. So it's very beautiful because it's a colorful fish in a jar. So yeah. Well, related with the article, I have many opinions and thoughts about it. I think that is super, super interesting. And in my opinion, I realized that through the article, how museums used to be and maybe have been struggling with deaccessioning, but at the same time with accession, because museums didn't have like any control over its practices. For example, the article has many interesting quotes, but one of these quotes was related about the Brooklyn's museum's first dates back in 1983. And they say that they took just about anything that was offered and thought maybe someday it will be useful. And I related all these things maybe with human nature, because it's like our instinct to be hoarders. Like, as for example, like in our parents' house, they have like a room full of stuff, and I related this comment about thought maybe someday it will be useful, and it's the same. It's like, hey mom, you should get rid of this object, and they are like, no, and you don't want to be like that. But when I think about me, it's the same thing. Like, it's this very powerful connection that we have with objects. So right now I'm like, I have, and how we have or how we have a relation with them, or how I feel identified with those objects. So yeah, so I understand where it does come from. So I related this a lot with the human nature, and yeah, and I have many questions, but we can like discuss about this and hear your opinions.
Can I say something in regard to this? Because I think it's really interesting that we have natural history and botanical collections here, and you, Caitlin, have an historical collection, right? Because I think that accessioning and deaccessioning for natural history collections and botanical collections are completely different from art museums and historical museums.
I would presume to agree, but not having experience with the art and historical museums, I don't know for sure. I certainly know that in our case, in our experience, we have essentially treated deaccession as something of a triage process. We've certainly been prone as an institution, particularly given particular individuals and their personality traits, given a lot of autonomy, as most faculty are, to take on items that perhaps were less valuable into spaces that really are limited and should be reserved for things that are objectively more valuable. And so I certainly had to deal with some of the fallout of that in my career at the Florida Museum, and we use triage, right? And we look at stuff and say, is it missing data, right? Because for us, principally, if you don't know its provenience, if you don't know where the animal is from or when it was collected, it becomes nearly valueless for the majority use case scenarios. And after that, if it has very poor condition or is degraded, that's something to consider for throwing it out. And particularly if it's both of those things, and that's a done deal, you throw it out. But even when something becomes a done deal, and I see some nodding heads around here, that still takes a lot of work. So I'm keenly interested in the problem of non-native fishes in Florida, and the way you solve that problem is to don't let it happen in the first place. So I'm very keen on not taking on materials that you're not ever going to accession. And fortunately, the curator who sets the research agenda for our division and I have tended to agree very strongly on that point. We don't take large unfunded collections anymore. There's not funding in place to actually process and accession the materials in a targeted time frame. We don't take them.
Yeah, Dee, could you elaborate more on why you think it is different, deaccessioning in an art museum or a history museum compared to a natural history?
Well, I talk from the Dutch situation. I think the natural history museums and botanical museums tend to accession on an encyclopedial level. So you want every change in stage available because you want to be able to research it. And I think art museums, they collect on a different level, thinking what was the best phase of this artist? When was the turning point when he changed from his pink period to his blue period, Picasso, for instance? And you think about artistic value, so it's more, it's not encyclopedial but curatorial. I don't know if that's the right words.
No, I think I might disagree with you, because there's certainly a difference in scale, because natural history and botanical collections are going to have far more objects than art or history collections. But it's still, you are acquiring objects because they're useful to you for some reason for research. And so you have your whatever criteria you have that you apply to, and either the objects are, in this case, the specimens of plants or animals, are used or they're not, and therefore can be deaccessioned or not. But I think it is very similar in what goes on. It's just the case of the scale. And in an art museum, you're dealing with far fewer objects, but you're still looking at the quality of the object, how it's going to be used, does it fit your mission, all of those other criteria. The same criteria that you'd use really with natural history.
Yeah, if you look at it that way, it's true.
Yeah. I say this because my daughter is the head of collections management at Spencer Museum of Art at University of Kansas. So we have had this discussion before about how similar and how different are they. And I think the scale tends to throw people off when they look at natural history and they see thousands and thousands and thousands of things. But we're pretty well doing the same thing other museums do, just in a different way. And some of our reasons for deaccessioning would be different. For instance, natural history museums, and particularly herbaria, do a lot more exchanging of specimens. And that would mean deaccessioning them to trade or to give to another museum. They do a lot more of that than other museums, but other museums do that too, just not at that same scale.
Well, the stuff that we exchange, though, has never actually been accessioned. It's stuff that, you know, when you went out and collected your plant, you collected 3 or 4 of them, and you keep one and you send the other 3 away.
Yeah, herbaria are unique in that way, I think, because I think most people that work with animals will bring in their collection, accession it, get it identified, and then begin making trades or depositing things in other institutions. But yes, I've been in the field with botanists, and I've heard them having this discussion about how many specimens to collect because they have agreements outstanding with other herbaria for those exchanges. So
yeah,
maybe it's because botanists trust each other to exchange, but animal people are always wanting to trade to see if they can get a better deal.
Well, I wonder if that's becoming a practice of the past as collections become better connected. And I say that because in some 23 years now at the Florida Museum, we do almost no exchanges of specimens with other institutions. And I know I have paperwork that documents exchanges. We just don't do it anymore. No one initiates it, and I don't initiate them. So it just seems like because everybody's data now, at least at the large natural history museums, is digitized and online, everybody knows what you have, and you just borrow it when you need to. So I realize this is just one aspect of a larger conversation about how museums hold
That's an interesting question. Sarah, are your botanists still collecting sufficient specimens to fulfill exchange agreements when they collect?
Yes, although we don't actually have that many ongoing formal agreements, but it's not, well, before COVID, it wasn't uncommon for me to just come into the herbarium one day and find a box of specimens on the desk that just showed up from New York or Harvard or Brown or wherever.
Yeah.
And I think, maybe we're not more worried about I just feel like herbarium specimens are so fragile and so easy to destroy, and we worry all the time about fire that we still want to have duplicates at other places because we worry so much about things happening to our collection. I mean, like when the Pringle herbarium was saved by firefighters, but just watching that video of all the smoke pouring out of the windows from the herbarium was like terrifying.
I think they do that with the Picasso Museum as well. I think they'd be terrified if there was fire.
Like any museum, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think, and we also emphasize a lot that, you know, you can't get DNA out of your image of a specimen or out of your database record. So you still need to have the specimen itself. So anyway, among the herbarium community, it is still really common to send duplicates to other places, is the short answer.
Well, Rob's comment is interesting because I have not worked actively in a natural history collection now for 12 years. And I think it's quite, yeah, that is interesting. Things have changed. But I can see that, Rob, the things you mentioned about digitization and availability of the specimens in the databases and availability of databases through the internet should change all that. It should make it a lot easier to borrow rather than to trade. That's interesting.
Yeah. And of course, we still have, you know, the same chronic underfunding problems that don't really invite you to take on new initiatives like, hey, I wonder why we don't have a sea moth in our collection. Could I get one? You know?
Well, I guess and I think one of the big differences is that what happens after deaccessioning, which is the disposal of things, because in art museums, you are frequently talking about the potential to gain large amounts of money. And in history, I think you have that possibility, but not quite as bad as art museums. And I think that probably drives a lot of deaccessioning in art museums. It certainly is in the United States. A lot of museums now are looking at culling objects out of their collection in order to raise funds to cover budget shortfalls.
Yeah, it's an interesting dilemma if you think about that.
Oh, yes.
Because I know the AAM, they loosened the accessioning guidelines, right?
No, it was AMD. It's
AMD,
the American,
I'm sorry, yeah.
It's the Association of of Art Museum Directors.
Yeah, exactly.
And actually, the way that was reported was incorrect because it was widely reported in the press that they had loosened their guidelines and they were going to allow deaccessioning and sale of art objects to use those funds to make up budget shortfalls over the next 2 years because of the COVID problem. And that is actually not true. If you look at the statement on the AAMD's website, what they changed was they said you can use the proceeds from endowed funds that are for purchasing art to you can use that money for other things over the next 2 years and you will not be sanctioned. They did not say that you could start deaccessioning collection objects and using, but that it appeared even in the New York Times got it wrong. The Times and the Washington Post both said, oh, they've changed the rules on deaccessioning. You can do whatever you want. That is incorrect. But those are ethical principles, not legal ones. So, you know, there's nothing to stop a museum from deaccessioning art and selling it and using the money however they want.
Especially legally, if they're not funded by any government.
But it's rather like being lost in the woods at night and lighting your map on fire with a match so you can see where you are. It's kind of pointless.
Yeah, well, but it's a different. It's probably another hour of talking about this because it is interesting if you want to save your museum for keeping your employees at work, or to save the collection and its heritage because you think that's far more important than that, because it exceeds a lot of lifetimes. But it's at times.
But yeah, I think that's a very good point. But you can also do great damage to your museum's collection by doing that. If you have a director come in who thinks that Picasso was not important, and usually it's not Picasso, usually it's some other artist that they pick, but you can have directors or curators who, for some reason, deaccession things they're not interested in personally rather than things that will not damage the museum collection. I think that's where the problems begin.
But it happens the other way around as well. There are curators that accession things because they're interested in it and it doesn't fit the mission of the museum.
And then you're stuck, yes.
Exactly.
Well, so I guess my question to the group would be, and Dee, I'm sure the answer for you is yes, because you consult with people about this all the time, but for other folks here, have you all engaged in, or are you currently engaged in some sort of formal deaccessioning process? I mean, I will tell you at the fish collection in the Florida Museum, the curator has wanted for many things to be accessioned for a long time and has particularly unsorted, uncatalogued materials, things that have not been processed, and has pushed hard and done some of that work himself and involved me in it. And now as we prepare to move to a new building, which, surprise, surprise, does not deliver all the space that we were promised it would, and space continues to be at a premium, he's throwing things out that I know for a fact he's not as well informed about as I am. And also, to be fair, there's things that I probably overvalue that should be discarded. And so we end up in a situation where it's civil and it's fine, but we're not really progressing in an orderly fashion. And maybe we should hire Dee. I don't know, but are the rest of you, are you having experience trying to formally clean up shop?
That's something that I've been working on.
Go ahead.
For the past couple of years here is I've been trying to do inventory of our collection and get rid of things, which has been really interesting because in my personal life, I'm a hoarder. And as I was going into the museum field, I did not realize how much joy it would give me to throw things away. Because we're a really small local history museum. We have a full-time staff of 2 people. And there's been a lot of staff turnover over the years. And there's been really bad cases of founder syndrome. And we have a lot of things in the collection that really should not have ever been accepted. But the problem that I've been encountering is because of the high rate of staff turnover and the lack of professional staff for many years, I have really shaky provenance for most of the things that I would like to get rid of. So I'm kind of stuck with them for now. So that is something that is added to my long-term project list of whenever I actually finish this inventory and get my list together, I'm trying to go back and figure out where these things came from so I can hopefully get rid of them because they're taking up so much space that I do not. I'm never going to be able to.
Well, if you don't mind me reacting upon your question, Rob, I think we here in the Netherlands try to, how do you call that? The fact that one person is making a decision of deaccessioning or not. In the Netherlands, we always try to make a group of experts or museum experts or even experts from outside your own institute to talk about the reasons why you want to deaccession. So there's always, as we call, intersubjective decision being made in which some people can safeguard you from your own emotions to say so because you hold something in high regard. And the other way around, if some other people know more about objects than you do, they can tell you, well, what you're doing right now is not a really smart thing to do. And I don't know if it would give you some space to talk about the decisions being made, but it helps a lot that you're not the only one responsible because that's a fear as well.
Yeah, our faculty are given total autonomy over the collections. So really what gets done to a large degree with the collections is, I'll be careful in how I word this, not because it's a sensitive issue, but because I want to get it right. But the functioning relationships within any division in the museum are going to greatly influence what comes in and what goes out, right? And personality really has a lot to do with that as well. And I find myself in a situation, and just as an example for institutions, because we're talking about museums in general, right? Not just our own particular cases, you know, where I actually hold more institutional knowledge than the person in charge, right? And so I know what some of these codes on labels mean, And what the person in charge knows is that that jar's been there a long time, and he or she doesn't understand the value of it, but just knows that it's taking up space. You know, some of those codes say this thing came from the deep sea of the Bahamas 50 years ago and has rare animals in it. And even if their condition's not great, they may be the only examples, the fewest examples of that species in museums. And a lot of this stuff is getting pitched after hours. So I just, you know, again, I don't mean to make this about my particular situation, but I think about museums in general. It would be nice if we had a practice in place, what you're talking about, Dee Dee, where museums as a whole agreed that that's a committee-like level of responsibility, because as somebody said earlier, and I think maybe it was you, Dee Dee, these specimens are about way more than our particular likes and dislikes. They're supposed to be here for centuries after we're gone. They, you know, we're just the custodians. So,
but then it's super important that you, if you're the only one who knows what these numbers are, start doing something with knowledge management, because if you're gone, nobody knows. And then deaccessioning is going to happen because there's no knowledge left.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And at the same token, you know, again, this could be said for the collections at the CalAcad. I know the ichthyology collections there are massive. There's one collection manager, and he's been there for longer than I have, right?
Yeah.
And I'm quite sure he's just as busy, right?
Yeah.
And it always seems like whether something gets thrown out or whether you give careful consideration to whether something comes in doesn't make it up that ladder very high. So I don't mean to be throwing up obstacles. I'm just trying to work my way through this.
I think it's a good point, because I have seen a bad deaccessioning example at a museum that I once worked with, where a curator who was new to the collection made the decision to throw out a few specimens, I mean, quite literally in the dumpster, not deaccessioning them, but just dumping them, that turned out to be figured specimens. So they were fossils in this case. And that's makes the specimen a lot more valuable. That means images have been published in the literature of it. And that was a terrible mistake that curator wound up having to buy them back from a rock shop, because somebody was dumpster diving and found them and sold them and recognized them for worse, that they recognized them as having been in the publication. So that's pretty embarrassing. On the other hand, I have a client right now, and I cannot say who they are because they are a client, but it's a museum that is a state museum, and they had 2 or 3 museums all under one name, and one of them dealt with industrial things and another was a science center, and 2 of them need to be closed for budgetary reasons, and that was quite clear. So they brought me in at the point where they had already made their deaccessioning decisions but had not acted on them, and what they wanted was an outsider to look at what they had done. And they had done it the right way. They had formed a committee within the museum. They had gotten some community input. They had found that they could take the industrial material and that could go intact, all of it, to another person, to another institution, a 501c3 museum. And then of the other stuff included things like mounted animals and some ethnographic artifacts. And that's where it got a little dicey. Some of the stuff was from Australia, and we are still working on whether any of that should or can be repatriated to Australia. But basically they had done everything right in forming the committee. They had made the right decisions. And so my role was really simple. I looked over all of the documentation and had several discussions and an on-site visit to look at things, and everything was done right. But that having that group work rather than individuals made a big difference, because there was always someone in the group who recognized something about the objects that argued for or against deaccessioning them. So I think Dee Dee's point is very good. That group decision can prevent a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, along the article, I realized the big importance of the collections management policy and about all those group decisions. And yeah, before they didn't have like any guideline, any policy. So like everything starts from the gift, because donors used to literally drop their collection at the museum door. And after they realized that some gift turned out to be fake or poor quality, but museums has to store and cares for them under person's will. And deaccession requires permission from his executors, and the last of them died in 1962. So
I thought that
I wonder. So I wonder if nowadays is there a solution to face this kind of legal constraints, or what do you do in this?
If you've got a legal document on the accession that says that the museum has to maintain the collection in perpetuity or other restrictions, the only way to do it is to hire a lawyer and go to court. And you can use what's called the Cypre doctrine, which can be used to break the purposes of a will. The most famous example of Cypre doctrine in the United States is probably the art museum in Philadelphia. I forget the guy's name, the guy that started the art school with John Dewey and had the fabulous collection of Impressionist art from the 20s. And his idea was never to have a museum, it was to have an art school, and this stuff was to be hung on the walls for the art school. But he's long dead, and so they finally, that will was taken to court and contested and overturned. And what the founder did not want is what happened. It's now a big art museum in downtown Philadelphia. But that's the only way to do it legally, is to go to court.
Yeah,
but it depends on the terms that you're dealing with.
And I am, because you have kind of the same problem, Caitlin, in your museum, that you don't know the provenance. I'm most of the times on the light side. I think if you've done your due diligence and you've asked the public and nobody knows anything, then I say, well, please deaccession it if you're not going to use it. But how do you think about that? Yeah. All of you.
Yeah. I just looked it up. It's the Barnes Foundation is the name. I couldn't remember. So yes, because Barnes did not want he did not like museums and did not want his stuff in a museum, and that is where it wound up due to the terms of his will, which were extremely difficult to comply with.
Edie, to answer your question, I think it's obviously a hard one because it speaks to having to assess value, right? It seems like for art museums and cultural museums, if you deaccession an object and then find out later that it had tremendous value, well, then obviously you've somehow made an error, right? Even if it doesn't fit with the vision of your institution. Whereas it seems like for me, for natural history museums, you deaccession something knowing that it likely has some future scientific value, which is very different than dollars and cents value, right, or euros value, because it's harder to quantify. I mean, I can argue that those specimens from the deep sea of the Bahamas cost X amount of dollars to collect, but as we all know, I can't tell you what the value is of describing a new species or publishing a paper that informed us about the diet of a little known obscure deep sea fish. So I think it becomes easier for people in natural history museums to eventually justify deaccessioning stuff because it is so hard to assess the value that it's very unlikely at any time somebody's going to come along later and tell you how badly you screwed up to the tune of $2 million at Sotheby's, right? I mean, that's probably an oversimplification. I realize that's not likely happening as much.
But I think that money should never be a reason to deaccession. I think your collection's profile should be the reason to deaccession.
I love that, but I think that's exactly the opposite of how we operate, right? The whole way our institution grows collections, and I suspect this is true for most natural history museums, is what you can get funding for, right? Like, we didn't seek to be the best collection of freshwater fishes from Southeast Asia. We're the Florida Museum of Natural History, for Christ's sake. But we are now because there was money from a particular division of the biggest funding agency, and our professionals were keenly suited to apply for it and get it. And so we did.
Yeah.
And so that's why we did that, because there was money to do it, right? And at least that seems to be the model in university museums. But it may be very different at public, private institutions.
You know, I think Dee Dee's correct that the disposal should be separate from the deaccessioning. And if you read the deaccessioning literature, at least in the United States, they all make that argument, but frequently the value is placed as the primary consideration in deaccessioning, and it should not be, because you can deaccession, and you can do any number of things with a deaccessioned object, including destroying it, giving it to another institution, or selling it. There's, you know, one of those will get you money and one will not, but the value, the monetary value of the object should not be considered at the deaccession. It should be whether it fits your museum mission or not. Is it supportive of your museum? Is it necessary in the museum? In terms of your example, Rob, I think that the argument would be made in a natural history museum that natural history museums like to think of themselves as international resources, and you may not have a curator right now who's working on deep sea fish from the Bahamas, but someone does, and those people can still access that collection to work on it, even though that's not your curators. I went through a very wrenching change when I was still at University of Kansas in that regard, because throughout, I was there 26 years, and throughout most of that, we were the big center for South American herpetology. We had the biggest collections from Costa Rica, Ecuador, a number of countries in South America. And we had a lot of South American students come, a lot of visitors, and those curators retired, and the new curators don't work there. And one of them works in Southeast Asia and another in the Caribbean. And so that means the nature of the collection, the incoming material is totally changed. But the material is still there to be used, but it is not as used as it once was because of the change in curators. But the change in curators doesn't mean you should change the entire collection. It doesn't mean you should go back and deaccession all of that South American material to another institution necessarily, because that can change again in the future. But you have another problem with art, which is fluctuating prices. Because if you're talking old masters or Picasso, those prices are probably going to be reasonably steady in the art market in the foreseeable future. But there is an argument made, and I happen to have the book here because I talked to a class about this last week, which is called, it's called Museum Inc. Inside the Global Art World. And it's written by a guy that was once a guide at the Guggenheim. And he makes the argument that, he makes the argument that a lot of modern art is actually made to be in a museum. It's made for that purpose. And what museums take and do not take directly affects the value of that art. And so by taking that art into the museum, it drives the price up. And this puts a whole new aspect on deaccessioning. And that, I think to a degree, that's true with any object that's ever been in a museum, whether it's natural history or history or anything. If it is deaccessioned as from the former museum or from that museum, it seems to have a higher value. But in the case, he makes this interesting case for modern art that much of it was, in his opinion, designed to be put into an art museum and therefore have its value increased, which kind of changes things. But the art world is famous for fluctuating values.
But what does it change? Because if you still deaccession for your collection's profile, then monetary value is not an issue.
That's correct.
So
and I think that is the ideal, but I agree with Rob. That's not what most museums seem to be doing in the U.S. They seem to be looking at the value they can derive from the sale, from the disposal. But that distinction should be clear, in my opinion, in policy, that deaccessioning and disposal should not be linked. They should be separate. And you make your deaccessioning decision based on what fits your collection. You then make your deaccessioning, your disposal decision, whether you're going to sell something or give it to another institution, after you've made your deaccessioning decision, not before.
It's so interesting because in the Netherlands, as a museum, you're obliged to offer to other museums for free for 8 weeks. And then museums have 8 weeks the time to think about if they want it or not. And then after 8 weeks, you're free to sell or destroy or whatever you want to do. So there's an extra layer in the whole process of keeping it in the public domain, because you have, of course, a lot of private museums. Mm-hmm. But it is, we have tried a lot with the accessioning here, and it didn't always work out fine. So we've been working on our guidelines and trying to prohibit failures.
I think I have to qualify one of my statements before, because I'm so tunnel visioned, right? I've just lived in the same place for so long. And when I think of deaccessioning, I don't ever think of stuff that we assign to catalog number 2. To me, that material, part of the register, is in a way inviolate. The only way I'm deaccessioning it is if it rotted, we did a poor job and it had to be discarded physically. And even then I keep the data. For us, it's been kind of circling around to what we talked about at the beginning, all that material that we never should have taken on in the first place, because quite frankly, we didn't have the resources to give it the proper treatment. So that's largely what I'm speaking of when I talk about deaccessioning. And we do that for space, right? For art museums, it might be, again, these questions of value, actual monetary value, but for us, the thing with the most monetary value is space. We're so desperate for space as these collections keep growing.
And time of people, especially.
Yeah.
Resources,
Yeah, but then if the objects were never registered, can you deaccession them? Because if nobody knows you have them, you can just throw them away.
Yeah, I'm conflating deaccession with disposal, and I apologize for that. That's just been my view. But I know the value of those things. Just because they're not identified and given a catalog or in the database, I can do it. I could do it pretty quickly. But all this over here that I'm already doing, right? And it's not like it's one jar, it's hundreds. And I've been doing it, and I love it, and it's been a process, right? I think any of us who have pulled things out of the backlog, so to speak, and brought it to the light of day, and then later in their career seen it borrowed and used, that's very redemptive. That's good.
And one moral, personal question for all of you. Do you regard transfer it to another museum as a form of deaccessioning in which your museum loses something, or do you think it's more like working together to help each other with collections?
Yeah, you see me shaking my head. No, as long as science benefits, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I mean, for me, coming from the history perspective, it's definitely, if it's something that's not just a piece of junk, which a lot of the things are.
I don't hear you very well. Am I the only one?
No, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which one it's pulling from, my headphones or the phone. Can you hear me better now?
That's better.
So coming from a history perspective, it's really gratifying when I can give something to another museum that's a better home for it. So that's, as long as it's not something that's just a piece of junk that no other museum in their right mind is going to want, that's the preference for what I would like to do with it, if possible. So that's definitely what I would prefer to do for things that are actually of value to another institution.
Dee Dee, you may know this already, and I suspect a lot of the natural history people here do as well, but a perverse twist on that is that we routinely collect new materials of specimens that our researchers process and publish on, describing new species, knowing that the name-bearing specimen, the type specimen, will have to be deposited in an institution in the country of origin that does not have the long-term trajectory or the standards of collection care that our institution does, or that even some other sister or partner institutions do, just because of international law. So, there's nothing more important for the stability of scientific names than those type specimens, and yet off it goes into some jar, literally on the floor in some closet, where access to it is limited at best, and it's so sometimes we do the process knowing even still that it's worse for science. Yikes.
Yeah, well, that's parallel with the repatriation of the non-Western stuff museums have in Europe. Everybody says, if we give it back, it will be lost forever. And then I think, well, we stole it somewhere somehow. Maybe we should give it back and decide then what's gonna happen. it's super difficult as a museum profession that you're so used to your high standards to give away these high standards and have other standards on your objects, but in the realm of their original situation. And I understand your frustration because it is super frustrating. But on the other hand, I think, well,
yeah, we're not even giving back. We're never even taking it in the first place, right?
No, yeah.
And I've been to these institutions. You know, I mean, I see. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we're talking dirt floors.
Yeah, you can also make the argument. You can also make the argument that the holotype is the best known specimen out of that for that species. It is the most described, the most detailed, and there is a process in place for naming a neotype. So if you're going to lose a specimen, you're better off to lose the holotype than lose a brand new specimen you just collected and haven't identified yet. Because you can replace the holotype and you can use that description to identify other members of the species. But I do this experiment or this conversation when I teach classes on collection management for natural history. I ask them, what are the most valuable specimens in your collection? Inevitably, they say the holotypes. And I point out, no, those are the least valuable because you already know what they are and they're well described in the literature and you can always name a neotype. The most valuable are the ones that just arrived from the field and they're over there in a bucket on the counter and you have no idea what's in there. That's the most valuable because that's what's going to be new to science. I will no one ever agrees, but
no, I will agree with you most of the way. You know what my counter arguments could be, right? And they're mostly on a case by case basis. So yeah, you know. New species from a single specimen, that's what I think.
No, I don't mean to denigrate the importance of holotypes, and not all, particularly older ones, were not all described very well. And I have been in the position of having actually discovered a lost holotype by accident. I was looking at a museum in Medellin that had been part of a high school that had been closed for years, and going through the museum, which we finally found guards to let us in. I was on another project. We had an afternoon to kill. We went to find this place. Looking, I glanced down at a jar, and there was a name I recognized because a student at Kansas happened to be working on that group, and I knew that was his holotype. And he thought it was lost because he had commented to me just casually one day. So I went home, I emailed him, and I said, Juan, I found your holotype. Here it is. And the next day he had a friend over there photographing it. So it had a happy ending, but you know, it was a weird thing to do. But yeah, I know how important those can be.
So I haven't heard Sarah or Marie a lot. What are your thoughts about the whole
Well, I think I can't really speak to other departments at the Academy because I'm not familiar with their processes, but you know, in geology, of course, our ongoing issue has been space. Ever since we moved into this new building in 2008, we started running out of space when we moved in. And our collections is shared with invertebrate zoology, so it's an even tighter space for us, sharing with their dry collections. And I think our collections manager in geology now, she came in about 2 years ago, and she's been actively trying to make more space and deaccession things, deaccession specimens, to Rob's point, that don't have good data or any sort of valuable data. Again, if we don't know what something is, where it was collected, that it's pretty useless to us. So we'll move things to our teaching collection more often than actually deaccessioning. But now, of course, our teaching collection is running out of space. So we do need to actually, once we're back in the building, we do need to start going through that and start deaccessioning. My collections manager also brought up a good point, which is something I've been thinking about, which is, with COVID and, these kind of reports coming out that about 30% of museums in America will be closing, we're starting to think about what happens to the small natural history museum, in the middle of California that has to close and needs to send their collection somewhere. Like, should we start making space so that we can take on these smaller collections from other institutions? So that's something that we're really actively thinking about, and we'll probably start working on when we're back in the building, just in the event that, you know, these museums do actually start closing. Can we take on their collections? They're not lost forever.
That's a task.
Yeah, that is a good point. We opened a new facility in 2003. That's when our big collections facility opened, and the herbarium part of it is like 85% full now, in part because once we opened and we had all of this space, smaller collections that were closing sent their stuff to us. They said, you have all this room, can you take our stuff? And I guess I have a couple of different thoughts banging around in my head. One is that maybe we are operating, at least in natural history collections, on different definitions of accessioning and deaccessioning, because I guess unlike Rob, if something doesn't already have a catalog number, I don't consider it to have been accessioned. So we have several herbarium cabinets of material. One is full of stuff that somebody sent us, unidentified plants of Argentina. And we don't have an Argentinian botanist, you know, someone who's an expert on Argentinian plants in our faculty or our grad students or anything. And I would, now that we're trying to go through some of our backlog, that's what we call all this stuff. I'm probably just going to box it up and send it to Argentina or for them to have, because it's not particularly useful for us. But I don't consider that deaccessioning because we never put it in the collections to begin with. But I also think this really highlights the necessity for natural history collections and smaller museums to have really explicit guidelines for accessioning and deaccessioning. So we, in our collections policies, we're super clear about, if you give us stuff, it belongs to the state of Connecticut and we can do whatever we want with it. You know, we can keep it or we can give it away. We have a committee that makes reviews of any decisions about deaccessioning things, which we haven't done yet, but as we get full, we might have to do. And we have very clear rules about what items even would be eligible to deaccession. And then separate from that, once a decision has been made, what are the possible ways that we can dispose of this object? And our first priority is teaching collections, then it's other research collections in the region, and then it's other research collections outside the region. So we have, it's super clear. I feel like if we wanted to deaccession something, we would know exactly what we had to do to get it done, which makes me feel a lot better than finding out that all of a sudden some specimens ended up in the dumpster.
Thank you.
Yeah, and to reiterate, I apologize. I really was just thinking about disposal. I don't consider things accessioned either until they get a catalog number. I guess even some sub-disciplines within the museum have an accessioning stage before cataloging, right? Where like, this donation from John Simmons of these specimens that he collected in this month in Colombia is an accession. Mm-hmm. And then within that are the cataloged objects. So we don't do that, so.
Well, legally accessioned means you have made it a permanent part of your collection, and that would require you, therefore, to have all of the proper permits and paperwork and all of that. Because you can't deaccession things you have not accessioned. You can get rid of things if you can prove you were the owner, but there's a line that is drawn. But in most museums, you have an accessioning policy that lays out your criteria for accessioning, and that cataloging is a subsequent step that is not equivalent to deaccessioning, but in some cases that's part of the process. But it varies quite a bit from one museum to another. In natural history, we rely far more on the cataloging process as a means of identifying our individual objects than they do in an art museum or a history museum. And that has to do, again, with the scale that we're working on. But, you know, the definition of catalog means put into category. It's not the same as accessioning, which means to take possession of. But if you look in Marie Malaro, the Malaro and Angelis legal primer on managing museum collections, you'll find a good definition of accessioning, and that distinction between taking ownership and not is there for US law. Internationally, I don't know, but at least for US law.
Thanks.
And Rob, don't apologize, no worries, because this is the idea of this group, no? To discuss,
Yeah, Rob, yeah.
to ask.
Oh no, I'm just so familiar with my abundant failings that I'm used to apologizing.
No, it's
something I do. It's fine. Yeah. That's exactly why I'm here, is to learn. It's good.
Okay, I would like to wrap up this meetup with a question that I have about the article. The author was pointing out at the beginning about lucrative tax deductions, and it's something that I still don't understand. So my question is, when a donor gives the collection to a museum, does the donor get tax deductions because the donor is contributing to a nonprofit institution?
under US law, the nonprofit sector, what in our tax code, the section is called 501c3, and that's, people tend to use that as a phrase, but that's actually identifies a section of US tax law. It says that if you're a 501c3 institution, you're a nonprofit, and you in some way work for the public good. So you do some benefit. So that could be, usually those are arts organizations, so ballet, a symphony orchestra, a theater, a museum. These are all things that are considered to be in existence for the betterment of the public. So they are exempted from certain taxes, not all taxes, but certain taxes, to enable them to function. And if you make a donation to a 501c3, it is something you own and you give it to them, you then have the option of receiving a tax benefit. How much of a benefit you get depends on your income, how much you've earned, how much you're paying in taxes that year. That becomes a legal matter. And that is between you and the Internal Revenue Service, between you and the tax collecting service. So when a museum receives an object, they will give you a receipt that says, yes, we are a 501c3. We have received this object. We thank you for this gift. But they are not legally allowed to put a value on the gift. The owner of the gift has to establish the value. And there are a number of ways that gets done depending on how big the value is. But as a museum, then, as a 501c3, you should keep that object for 3 years before you get rid of it. If you get rid of it before that period, you have to file a form with the Internal Revenue Service explaining that you no longer have it, and that then the person who donated it to you may have part of their tax benefit revoked. But that's how it works. The tax benefit depends entirely on the finances of the donor, but it has to be a free and clear gift to a tax deductible organization, a 501c3. It's rather complicated, and that's not a system that exists in very few other countries. It's pretty much unique to the United States.
Yeah, and Laura, in the United States, you can report values to the IRS that are based in fact or not. It doesn't matter until they find out. And,
well, the IRS law IRS requires you to establish a written value if it's over $500, and when you get up over $1,000, you're required to get an outside appraisal for your tax purposes. So if you get audited and you haven't done that, you'll get caught. I think Dee Dee was
right. But my point is, you don't have to do it.
Yeah, you don't have to.
This is what's playing out in the news right now.
Otherwise you'll wind up like our beloved president.
You can roll the dice and hope it never catches up with you, and maybe it won't. You can. And you could fight it in court forever and ever.
Yeah, I suppose.
All right, I've said too much.
Dee Dee, were you going to say something?
No, we have the same system.
Oh, you had your finger up, so. Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, because we have the same system.
Oh, okay, good.
And I think even if you die here and you bequeath your collection to the state, then you get a lot of tax reducing on your heritage to your children. Mm-hmm. So we try to make culture as accessible as possible.
Yeah, well, here it's not to the state, although you can also do that. But in addition to the state, you can bequeath to a public nonprofit organization.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, interesting, guys. It's really, I've never talked with natural history people about deaccessioning. And it is interesting because I was asked to talk about deaccession for our biggest natural history museum, the Naturalis in Leiden. I don't know if you know it.
Oh yeah,
Of course.
of course.
So it's good.
I've been there.
Yeah, well, I think they have 48 million objects the whole of Netherlands in public museums have 76. So
highly digitized.
yeah, and they're working on it, and I'm really interested in knowing why they want to deaccession and how they are planning to do it, how they are going to make their decisions. Because
Well, I know they have a serious space problem.
That's what it is.
Yeah, and right now they have more objects than they have personnel to take care of.
Yeah.
And objects have been packed so tightly that they cannot monitor the condition. And that's my big complaint with Naturalis is you cannot check on the specimens and see whether they're deteriorating or not because they have them so densely packed. But at the time they made that decision, I guess they had no other choice.
But they just built a new storage space.
But they haven't moved into it yet.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, see, I was there a few years ago when they had vacated their original space and gone into the dense storage, and at that point did not have the funds for the new space, and I've not been back. I was there in, I think, 2012 or something like that.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura.
Yeah, thanks, Laura, for organizing.
This is our second meetup, and the idea is that I would like to have like a product or like a reflection after each meetup. So it will be nice if you can submit to our circle or send me to my email, and I'm going to meet to our network like a photo or a quote or I don't know, something meaningful for you about this meetup. So it will be great to have like a souvenir for this, like a reflection or something.
Yes, I learned that John wants to be a frog.
Some say I'm already there. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you all. Very nice to meet everybody.
Nice
And
to
good
meet
to
you
see
guys.
you. Rob.
Thank you, Didi. Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
If you ever have questions, let me know. I'm always willing to talk.
All right, great.
Yeah.
I may
Thank
reach
you.
out. Okay, bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Bye bye.
You too. Bye.